Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your nightly review for Thursday, January 24th. It's 4 o'clock Eastern Time. Shortly before the close, the Dow Jones was up 45 points to 13,824. S&P 500 was basically unchanged at 1494. I think it's going to settle virtually unchanged. If it was up a tick, that would be a new 5-year plus high. It is for the Dow. NASDAQ was down about 22 points or 0.7% to 3130. And that's because of Apple. Down huge. I'll get to that in a moment. Actually, I'll cover it now. They were Apple shares traded at $705 on September 21st. They closed today at about $450, a decline of 36% since September. Down about $63 today, or about 12%. But I will get into Apple specifics in a bit. You know, I started doing writing my Week in Review column about 14 years ago. It'll be 14 years next month, 15 and a half since I started the column with PIMCO. And it's always been about half geopolitics, half financial markets. I'm always looking for that event that might move markets, change sentiment. And I've been amazed at how complacent everyone is these days on the foreign policy front and the potential for something in the Middle East, or now especially in the Far East, to impact events. And I know that Art Cashin, the great floor operator on the New York Stock Exchange, has been mentioning this a lot recently as well, the complacency. So just keep it in mind. Nonetheless, Tokyo Nikkei was up 1.3% yesterday, or today, their time, and London and Frankfurt were up big. Gold finished down $19 at $16.67, oil at $96, and the 10-year Treasury 1.85%. I forgot to mention yesterday, speaking of sentiment, that the bull-bear ratio I mentioned last week, both readings were unchanged. I thought the number of bulls would be up this week. It was unchanged at 53.2 and the bears at 22.3, so you still have that 30-point spread in between the two. A danger sign. On the domestic front, after the failed November election effort, House Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan is back, tanned and rested. Ryan promised to submit a budget plan in the coming weeks that would erase the annual federal deficit within a decade by cutting government spending and without raising further tax revenue. The president got his revenues. Ryan said at a breakfast hosted by the Wall Street Journal. To repeat from yesterday, the House extended the debt ceiling deadline through May 18th by a 285 to 144 vote. The Senate will approve the measure next week, and the President will sign it. So now it's about the March 1st sequester and the March 27th continuing resolution, and you'll get tired of me saying that, but I do have to say that almost every day. And we await what is definitely going to be a highly partisan State of the Union address in early February, as far as I understand. In Europe, the Euro area composite reading of the services and manufacturing economy came in at 48.2 for this month. That's a flash estimate, up from 47.2 in December, so it is still contracting, but at a slower pace. The services PMI was 48.3, up from 47.8. Manufacturing rose to 47.5 from 46.1. Again, they're preliminary numbers. Meanwhile, Spain officially announced the unemployment rate was 26% in the fourth quarter, up from 25% in the third. The IMF is looking for Spain's economy to contract 1.5% this year. But here you have a microcosm of what is going on in Europe. The real economy sucks. But the risk of financial contagion is off the table, at least in the short term. Spain, for example, said it will cover 13% of its planned debt issuance for the year in the month of January, helped by the fact the yield on the 10-year is down to about 5.10% versus a peak of 7.75% last July 25th, before Mario Draghi's famous comments. Olivier Blanchard, the chief economist of the IMF, said today in Davos, is Europe on the mend? Yes and no. Something has to happen to start growth. Financial markets fine, regular economy, fundamental economy not good, not fine. In China, the head of their National Economic Research Institute told the World Economic Forum, again in Davos, that China should grow faster this year than it did in 2012. Last year's GDP was up 7.8%, and it was running at a 7.9% rate in the fourth quarter. Fan Gang said, quote, "Now I can say the soft landing has landed last year, and now it's underway to recovery. More than half of last year's growth came from consumption, not exports, and online shopping grew 100% last year." But when we talk about consumption, yes, more than half of last year's growth was from the consumer, but the consumer still accounts for just 35% of the overall economy versus 70% in the US. HSBC then released their Flash Purchasing Managers Index for January, 51.9, the best pace in 2 years. It was 51.5 in December, so this is good. February 1st, you get the final numbers for January, both from HSBC and from the government. In Japan, exports were down 5.8% in December from a year earlier, bolstering the case for Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to continue to weaken the yen to boost exports. Exports to China in December were down 15.8%, to the US down 0.8%, and to the EU down 11.1%. South Korea, their GDP grew 1.5% in the fourth quarter from a year earlier, also unchanged from the third quarter. This is not good, it's the weakest in 3 years. Lee Sung-kwan, an economist at Shinwan Investment Corp in Seoul, told Bloomberg News, Japan is trying to boost its economy by weakening the currency for exporters at the expense of its consumers and other countries. South Korea will be hit the hardest among them. South Korea will be hit the hardest among others, as it is in direct competition with Japan over many products from cars to electronics. I never showed you what I'm reading. These are all my scribblings. Then I cut quotes out like that. And my Apple remarks. Okay. Total revenues for the quarter were up 18% to $54.4 billion. And Apple sold a record 47.8 million iPhones in the 3 months ending December, up 78% on the prior year, but basically in line, and the revenue figure was disappointing. Apple sold 22.9 million iPads in the Christmas quarter, up from 15.4 million a year ago. But that wasn't viewed as anything terrific. Net income of $13.1 billion and earnings per share of $13.81 beat Wall Street's forecast, though the profit growth was the slowest since 2003, with the weakest sales increase in 14 quarters. So concern is rising over production cost and competition from Samsung, though on the smartphone front, according to Cantor Comtech, Apple increased its share of the market to 51.2% from 44.9% a year earlier in the US for the Christmas quarter. But Apple's guidance for the current quarter was also below street estimates overall. You add it up and there goes 12% market cap. Turning to Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu has 6 weeks to form a coalition where President Shimon Peres can give someone else the task, but as long as Yair Lapid and his There Is a Future party joins Netanyahu's Likud Betenu alliance, that's 50 of the 61 seats needed, and Netanyahu should have little trouble getting the rest. It's just that it could be a different combination than he had before. For instance, the Shah's religious party may be abandoned. Lapid, for starters, wants an end to military exemptions and government stipends for Orthodox Jews. What seems clear is Netanyahu's government is going to be more centrist and settlement building less of a focus. He's also going to have to deal with a ballooning budget deficit, which means austerity. Let alone you have that Iran issue. In Jordan, 20,000 Syrian refugees, 20,000 flooded into the country in the past 7 days, the fastest influx since the start of the uprising. Jordan is now home to 300,000 Syrian refugees. But thus far, Jordan is keeping its border open. What it needs is money to improve the infrastructure of these camps. Back to Japan, Taiwanese activists approached the Japanese-controlled Diaoyu Islands, senkakus to the Japanese. Remember, Taiwan, along with China, also claims the Diaoyus. Japan's Coast Guard fired water cannon and the boat turned away. But more importantly, in North Korea, I mentioned this yesterday, but then we had further issues today. The National Defense Commission, which is headed by Kim Jong-un, followed up statements on Wednesday that it would enhance its nuclear deterrent to warn on Thursday, today, that it will conduct its 3rd nuclear test, as well as keep launching rockets as part of a, quote, new phase of combat with the United States, which it blames for the new round of sanctions against Pyongyang. Settling accounts with the U.S. needs to be done with force, not with words, as it regards jungle law as the rule of its survival. That's what the National Defense Commission said. Ironically, a day after Secretary of State Hillary Clinton testified before the Senate and House committees on her response to the Benghazi attacks that killed 4 Americans, Britain's Foreign Office urged British nationals to leave the Libyan city in response to what they said was a specific threat to Westerners. In an unusual move, the Foreign Office released a statement that it was now aware of a specific and imminent threat to Westerners in Benghazi and urged any British nationals who remain there against our advice to leave immediately. Germany and the Netherlands followed Britain's lead in urging their citizens to bolt. Benghazi is a city of 1 million, and it is a business hub which employs a lot of Westerners. There's an international school there where British and other foreign nationals teach, from what I understand. Back in the States, interesting piece by Sam Hananel of AP. Government figures released Wednesday showed union membership in the U.S. declined from 11.8% to 11.3% of the workforce, the lowest level since the 1930s. Overall membership fell by about 400,000 workers to 14.4 million, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. More than half the loss, about 234,000, came from government workers, including teachers, firefighters, and public administrators. And in the private sector, the membership rate fell from 6.9% to 6.6%. So that's rather troubling for organized labor. Union membership was 13.2% in 1935 before FDR signed the National Labor Relations Act. It then peaked at about 33% in the 1950s. By 1983, it was back down to 20%, and now it is 11.3%. About 51% of union members work in government, where the rate of union membership is 37%. Since August of 2008, state government employment has declined by 135,000, while local government employment has fallen by 546,000. Unions still spent, however, more than $400 million during the 2012 election cycle to support President Obama and keep a Democratic majority in the Senate. South Africa, this is according to the BBC today, happened today, about 15,000 crocodiles have escaped from a farm in South Africa's far north amid heavy rains and flooding. Many were recaptured, but more than half are still on the loose. Zane Langman, the son-in-law of the farm's owner, told the newspaper, the Bield, that most of the crocodiles had escaped into dense bush and the Limpopo River. There used to be only a few crocodiles in Limpopo. Now there are a lot. We go to catch them as soon as farmers call us to inform us about crocodiles. Mr. Langman said he went to rescue friends in a flooded house in the area by boat on Sunday. When we reached them, the crocodiles were swimming around them. Praise the Lord, they were all alive. Tip for the day: stay away from the Limpopo River in South Africa. Mad Men fans, the drama returns April 7th. That's all for tonight. I'll be back with you on Monday. Check out my week in review, which I post early Saturday at stocksandnews.com. Keep the men and women of our armed forces in your thoughts and prayers. Take care.